The night crept by slowly, typical of a Tuesday night in Perth, Australia. The air felt slightly humid after an afternoon drizzle, and the streets began to empty. The clock on my car's dashboard read 1:27 a.m. I was ready to head home, hoping no more ride requests would come in. However, the notification sound from the Uber app broke the silence. A new ride request. I sighed, reaching for the phone mounted on the dashboard. The pickup location was listed as a gated community on the outskirts of Perth, an area known for its luxurious houses and quiet nighttime streets. The passenger's name was brief, A. The drop-off destination was a few miles back towards the city center, to an old and somewhat dilapidated apartment building in a less desirable area, a stark contrast to the pickup location. All right, I muttered, accepting the request. Maybe this would be the last trip, and I could finally get some rest. I followed the app's navigation, driving along the wide and deserted residential streets. Dim garden lights illuminated the tall fences and grand gates. After a few minutes, I arrived at the pickup point marked on the map, an area outside one of the larger complex gates, right under the shade of a large leafy eucalyptus tree. I slowed down and stopped right at the app's pin. The surrounding street appeared empty. Only the chirping of crickets broke the silence of the night. I lowered the car window slightly, trying to observe the surroundings. There was no sign of a passenger. I reached for my phone, intending to send a message through the app, but before my fingers touched the screen, I saw movement in the darkness beneath the eucalyptus tree. A figure slowly emerged from the shadows. My heart beat a little faster. The figure was completely covered. A long, dark coat with a deep hood drawn up, concealing their entire face and body shape. They walked with slow steps towards the rear passenger side of my car. I held my breath as they opened the back door. The hinges creaked softly in the stillness of the night. The figure got in and sat down on the back seat without uttering a single word. The door closed with a soft but somehow heavy thud. "Good evening, mate," I greeted, trying to be friendly and professional as usual. I waited for a response, but all I received was silence. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the hood completely obscured everything, leaving only a deep darkness where a face should have been. "The destination is the apartment in the north of Perth," I continued, making sure. Again, there was no response. I could only feel their presence in the back, an unusual cold aura for a nighttime passenger. Usually, people this late are either more open, either sleepy and quiet, or even more talkative due to fatigue or perhaps something else. This passenger's silence felt different, almost intimidating. I put the car in drive and started moving, leaving the quiet residential complex behind. The yellow streetlights alternately illuminated the car's interior, but the shadow from the passenger's hood remained deep. I occasionally glanced at the rearview mirror, but there was no change. The figure sat upright, facing straight ahead, as if I wasn't even there. As we got closer to the destination area, I noticed that the GPS on my phone started acting strangely. The usually strong signal suddenly weakened, the signal icon flickering erratically. This was odd, as this area usually had good signal coverage. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be a temporary glitch. However, the strangeness didn't stop there. Suddenly, the back of my neck started to prickle, not from cold, but more like I was being watched. This feeling grew stronger, even though I couldn't see the passenger's eyes in the back. Strange thoughts began to surface in my mind, trying to find a rational explanation for the passenger's silence and cold aura. Maybe they were sick, or had just experienced something bad. We continued driving, passing through streets that were becoming increasingly busy with the dimming city lights. Several times I tried to break the silence with casual questions about the traffic or the weather, but each attempt was met with the same unbroken quiet. Finally, the navigation app announced that we were close to the destination. I slowed down as we entered the street leading to the old apartment building. The street got in. I was certain it hadn't opened again during the ride. I turned back to the front, then quickly looked back again. Still empty. How was it possible? Where had the passenger gone? I hadn't heard the sound of the door opening, hadn't felt any movement on the back seat. I checked the app on my phone. The trip was listed as completed. The fare was recorded. A had been dropped off. But where and how had they exited the car without me noticing, without a sound? The coldness that had previously been just an aura now crept all over my body. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't explain what had just happened. An irrational fear began to grip me. Without thinking twice, I immediately started the engine and sped away from the dark and silent apartment building. I no longer cared about the potentially incorrect fare or a bad review. All that was on my mind was to get as far away as possible from that place. Since that night, I've always felt uneasy accepting late-night ride requests, especially from quiet suburban areas. And until now, I have never again accepted or dared to accept a pickup with the name A on my app. That experience left a mark that is hard to forget. A question without an answer that continues to haunt my thoughts every time I drive passengers in the darkness of night. Saturday in Philadelphia felt quite busy. The sun was shining brightly, and the traffic around the shopping mall was quite dense. After dropping off a mother and her 2 children, I received a new ride request. The pickup location was the main lobby entrance of the mall, and the passenger's name was Lila. When I arrived at the pickup point, a young woman hesitantly waved her hand. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long, slightly disheveled hair and a somewhat gloomy expression. She was wearing a pale blouse and jeans. She didn't seem strange or suspicious at first glance, just a bit quiet. "Good afternoon," I greeted her warmly, confirming her name. "Lila?" "Yes, good afternoon," she replied softly, opening the back door and getting into the car. Her voice sounded a little hoarse. I looked at the destination listed in the app, an address in one of the residential areas on the outskirts of Philadelphia that I knew fairly well. The route displayed looked standard, going through the main roads and estimated to take about 45 minutes depending on traffic. I started driving, trying to create a comfortable atmosphere. "How's your day going?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "So-so," she replied briefly, then fell silent again. I understood. Some passengers preferred to enjoy the ride in silence. I turned on the radio at a low volume, playing a music station that wasn't too intrusive. We drove through the hustle and bustle of Philadelphia's streets. Lila occasionally looked out the window, but mostly spent her time staring at her phone. The journey went smoothly for about 20 minutes, and Lila's expression looked genuinely pleading, and there was a hint of desperation in her voice. "Where exactly is it?" I asked, trying to gauge how far the deviation would be. She began to give directions, and I followed them. We turned onto a smaller road, then entered a series of increasingly narrow alleys that felt more and more unfamiliar to me. The roads started to become poorly maintained, with cracked asphalt and many potholes. The houses around us looked older and less cared for compared to the area we had just passed through. "Just a little further," she said, her tone a bit more anxious. We continued along the increasingly deserted streets, with wild vegetation starting to creep onto the sides of the road and several houses that looked abandoned with boarded-up windows. It was still broad daylight, but the atmosphere here felt gloomy and uncomfortable. A sense of unease began to settle over me. Finally, Lila asked me to stop in front of a small, very dilapidated house. The paint was peeling. Many of the windows were broken and covered with wooden planks. The front yard was overgrown with tall weeds. The house looked like it hadn't been inhabited for years. "Wait here, okay?" she said, opening the back door. "I'll just be a moment inside." She got out of the car and walked towards the dark-looking front door with quick steps, disappearing behind the slightly ajar door. I waited. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. I started to feel impatient. "Lila?" I called out softly from inside the car. There was no response. I honked the horn once, gently. Still no response. I reached for my phone and tried to call her through the app. The call connected but went straight to voicemail. This was starting to feel very strange. Why was she taking so long inside that creepy, empty-looking house? After 15 minutes had passed and Lila still hadn't returned, I decided to get out and check. I opened the car door and stepped out. The air around felt stuffy and silent. I walked slowly towards the front door of the house. It was still slightly open as before. "Hello? Lila?" I called out again, this time louder. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the weeds answered. I pushed the door open a little wider and peered inside. The interior of the house was dark and cold. Thick dust covered the old and cluttered-looking furniture. Cobwebs hung in the corners of the room. The house was completely empty, feeling like no one had lived there for years, just as its exterior suggested. I turned around, intending to go back to the car and perhaps try calling Lila again or reporting this strange incident through the app. But when I turned back, Lila was no longer there. I looked around. My car was the only vehicle on this deserted and dilapidated road. There was no sign of Lila's presence. Where had she gone? How could she have disappeared so quickly without a sound? A strange chill ran down my spine. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and confusion. I didn't understand what was happening. I felt like I had just been played by something unseen. Without thinking twice, I immediately got back into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I pressed the accelerator deeply, wanting to get away from that eerie place as quickly as possible. I let the app continue running, even though the trip felt incomplete and nonsensical. I didn't care about the fare or any potential problems. All that mattered to me at that moment was getting away from the empty house and the mysterious woman who had vanished without a trace. Since that incident, I've become much more cautious about detour requests from passengers, especially if they lead to remote and unfamiliar places. The experience with Lila and the empty house remains an unsolved mystery, a disturbing reminder of how unexpectedly strange things can happen, even in broad daylight. About a year ago, when I was still actively driving for Uber, there was one name that kept appearing on my phone screen. A name that always evoked an inexplicable feeling of unease whenever I saw it. Trini. Ride requests from this name started appearing frequently, almost every few days. What was strange was that Trini's profile picture was always the same. A blurry, low-resolution image of a woman with long, dark hair that partially covered her face. Her expression was difficult to read, but there was a faint aura of sadness emanating from it. The pickup locations were also always different and often in unusual and eerie places. One night, the request came from the middle of a public cemetery in the city, around 3 a.m. in the morning. Another time, it was from a completely empty office building in the business area on a quiet Sunday afternoon. There was also a request from in front of a non-operational mental hospital in the area. The destinations were equally strange and disturbing. Once, the destination changed mid-trip to a point on the side of a dark highway with no buildings or settlements nearby. Another time, the destination was a narrow and dark alley in the Old Town area, known for being haunted. Every time I drove Trini, a feeling of unease always enveloped me. Every time Trini got into my car, she would be completely silent. No greetings, no destination confirmation, no interaction whatsoever. She would just sit in the back seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield with a blank gaze. If I tried to initiate a conversation, asking how she was or confirming her destination, she wouldn't respond. It felt like she wasn't really present in the car, like a breathing statue. The most chilling part was that the destination listed in the app would always suddenly change mid-trip. Initially, it might be a clear address, but then it would change into a series of random, nonsensical characters or GPS coordinates in an uninhabited place. And when we supposedly arrived at that strange destination, there would be no one there. Trini would simply vanish from the back seat, without the sound of a door opening or any perceptible movement. I would look back, and the seat would be empty. I reported Trini's profile multiple times through the Uber app, explaining the strange occurrences I had experienced. However, a few days later, ride requests from the same profile would appear again. It felt like something was persistently trying to connect with me. I started telling other drivers in our online group about this strange experience. It turned out that some of them had also had similar encounters with the same Trini profile. We started reminding each other to reject any ride requests from that name, but the requests kept coming, as if they were chasing us. Then, one cold and windy night in the south of the city, I accidentally accepted a ride request from Trini. My finger slipped while trying to reject it, or perhaps something else made me unintentionally accept it. As soon as I saw the familiar name and profile picture appear on the screen, my blood ran cold. The pickup location was very close to my rented house. As I drove towards the pickup point, A very strong feeling of fear and foreboding enveloped me. My heart pounded, my palms were sweaty. I arrived at the pickup point marked on the map, a dimly lit street corner near my house. There was no one there. The street seemed quiet and deserted. I sighed in relief, thinking maybe it was just a system error or the passenger had canceled. However, as I was about to cancel the trip in the app, my eyes fell on something lying on the side of the road, right under the dim street lamp, an old, faded photograph. I stopped the car and reached for the photo. It was a blurry picture of a woman with long, dark hair, exactly like Trini's profile picture. The photo paper was yellowed, and the edges were torn. With trembling fingers, I flipped the photo over. On the back, written in faded black ink, was a single word written in a weak handwriting style: Rini, lost. Suddenly, the Uber app on my phone closed by itself. The screen went black for a moment before returning to my phone's home screen. I tried to open it again, but there was no new activity. The ride request from Trini had disappeared. I never saw Trini's profile again after that night. However, the experience left a deep impression. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving alone on the quiet streets, I still unconsciously check my rearview mirror just to make sure there isn't a silent figure in the back seat. The name Trini will forever be etched in my memory as a terrifying mystery from behind the wheel.